Claire hadn't set foot in Ashford for 7 years. Now, all she had left of her parents was a broken clock and a house full of memories. The rental car hummed gently as it curved through the familiar bend toward Main Street. Snow flurries drifted past the windshield like falling lace. Ashford looked just as she remembered it, maybe a little smaller, a little quieter, as if the whole town had lowered its voice since the last time she'd been home. Thanksgiving wreaths still clung to porch rails, their ribbons fluttering in the breeze, and the old hardware store still had that hand-painted sign in the window, closed Thursdays, open to stories on Fridays. She parked beside the town square and paused before stepping out, glancing at her reflection in the rearview mirror. 34 now, lines beginning to soften the space between her brows, hair pulled back into the same loose twist she'd worn since grad school. Her scarf smelled faintly of lavender, something her mother used to keep in linen drawers. The law office stood quietly on the corner, its wood-paneled exterior aged but solid, like most things in Ashford. She pushed the door open. The scent of old paper and furniture polish hit her instantly, rooted her there for a beat. Her boots tapped softly against the hardwood floor as she entered. Evan was already there, standing with one hand tucked into the pocket of his tailored gray coat. He looked like a magazine ad for legacy, wealth, and all the things Claire had never cared to chase. He glanced at her with a tight smile. "Well, you made it." She nodded but didn't offer warmth. Mr. Langston appeared behind his desk, eyes soft beneath thick glasses. "Ms. Whitmore. I'm sorry we're meeting again like this." Claire offered a quiet, "Thank you," and sat down opposite Evan. The reading was quick. Evan inherited the Whitmore estate, the foundation assets, and controlling interest in the family trust. Claire's name was read only once. To Claire Elise Whitmore, Mr. Langston intoned, clearing his throat, "Your parents leave the mantel clock that rested in their sitting room. It was your mother's favorite." Silence followed. Claire felt every muscle in her body freeze, then realign. She offered a small nod. Evan let out a short laugh. "They always said you liked broken things." She turned to look at him. "They always said a lot of things," she replied, evenly. The lawyer avoided eye contact as he slid a manila envelope across the desk. "It's already been packed for you." Outside, the cold sliced through her coat. She wandered without purpose until her feet took her to a familiar diner at the corner of Lincoln and Maple, the place her mother used to love for its bottomless coffee and no questions asked policy. The bell above the door jingled softly as she entered. Heat and the scent of apple pie wrapped around her like a wool shawl. A voice called from a booth near the window. "Claire Whitmore, is that you?" Nancy Odell sat with her hands wrapped around a chipped mug, eyes warm behind oversized glasses. Claire managed a smile and slid into the booth across from her. "You look just like Lucille," Nancy said gently, patting Claire's hand. "Though you've always had your father's chin." "Not sure that's a blessing." Claire chuckled despite herself. Nancy nodded toward the box she was carrying. "That the clock?" Claire nodded. She hadn't opened it yet. Nancy's face softened. "Your mama used to whisper to it sometimes, like it held secrets." Not in a spooky way, more like, she trusted it to keep something safe. Claire looked at the box. "It hasn't worked since I was little." "Maybe it wasn't supposed to," Nancy said. "Lucille once told me, some things don't need to tell time, they remember it." They sipped tea until the windows fogged and the waitress brought over 2 slices of warm pie without asking. Claire tipped $5 more than she needed to and bundled up for the walk back to the house. The Whitmore home sat at the end of a long gravel drive, its shutters dark green and familiar. Inside, she walked quietly through rooms that seemed at once too large and too full of echoes. She made her way to the old guest room, the one her mother insisted was a cozier, though it had always creaked louder than the others. She unpacked the clock and placed it on the dresser. The wood was worn smooth at the corners, brass handles tarnished, the dial cracked faintly at the edge. Claire brushed her fingers along its top, then stood back. It looked even smaller than she remembered. A remnant. She washed up, changed into an old sweatshirt, and curled into bed beneath the heavy quilt her grandmother had sewn. Somewhere in the house, the pipes groaned in protest against the cold. Outside, the wind gathered, pressing branches against the shutters like they too remembered something. That night, Claire's dreams were restless. Faces came and went, rooms shifted. She stirred once at midnight, then again at 2:40. But at exactly 3:17 a.m., a soft, metallic chime cut through the quiet like a question. Her eyes opened wide. She sat up in bed, heart racing. She stared at the silent clock, whispering, "What are you trying to tell me?" Claire had restored hundreds of clocks in her life. None had ever spoken first. She sat cross-legged on the rug in her old workshop, the clock resting on a folded flannel blanket before her. The room hadn't changed much since high school, tools lined the pegboard, the air smelled faintly of sawdust and linseed oil, and the single bulb overhead cast soft shadows against the workbench. Her hands, steady from years of restoration work, moved with practiced ease, though her heart thudded a little too loudly with each twist of the screwdriver. As the back panel came free, something slid loose inside. Not a spring or a gear, but a piece of paper, carefully folded. Claire reached for it, her breath catching as she unfolded the crisp square. It wasn't yellowed, just old enough to feel intentional. "If you've found this," the note read in her mother's familiar, looping cursive, "you're ready." Below the line were GPS coordinates and a date, November 28, 1989. Claire stared at it. Her birthday. Her brow furrowed. She whispered her mother's name without thinking, "Lucille," and the clock ticked once. A single, soft sound in the silent room. Claire looked up. The hands hadn't moved. She swallowed hard and gently closed the panel. The air outside was sharper than before, laced with snow that now stuck in corners and gutters. She zipped up her coat, slung a thermos of hazelnut coffee into her bag, and headed toward the town library. The path there was muscle memory. Past the old barber shop with its crooked red and blue pole, past the park bench where Lucille used to read on summer mornings. The library stood like a Victorian whisper in the middle of town, tall and narrow, with frosted glass windows and ivy climbing its side. Inside, the air was warm and smelled like paper and wool. Claire stepped onto the thick carpet, feeling it muffle her steps. She passed rows of neatly labeled drawers and turned a corner near the local archives section, where a familiar figure sat hunched over a newspaper. "Albert?" she asked. The man looked up, his face creasing into a grin. "Claire Whitmore. Thought you'd grown too big for books." She smiled. "Never for books. Maybe just, for answers." He gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit. You look like your mama when she was onto something." Claire pulled the note from her pocket and slid it across the table. "Do these coordinates mean anything to you?" Albert adjusted his glasses, studied the numbers. "That's old farmland near the Whitmore edge, right by the old greenhouse. Been off the maps since the 90s. Claire nodded, then added, "And the date." Albert leaned back, tapping his chin. "That'd be the day your mother won the Ashford Science Fair. I remember, I was one of the judges. She brought that strange contraption, a clock with no hands. Called it the Mechanical Memory Project." Claire blinked. "She told me it was just an art piece." Albert stood, surprisingly nimble for his age, and motioned her to follow. They weaved through dusty aisles until he pulled a binder labeled 1989 Community Events. He flipped it open to a page with a grainy photograph. There was Lucille, smiling, young, holding the very clock now resting on Claire's dresser. "She said time was about more than minutes," Albert murmured. "Said it could hold intention." Claire stared at the photo. She was right. They sat in silence for a while before Albert reached into his satchel and pulled out a small, cream-colored envelope. "She gave me this after the fair. Told me to hold on to it for you, just in case you ever came looking." Claire's fingers trembled slightly as she took it. Inside was a key, old-fashioned, brass, and engraved with 3 letters, LMW. There was also a slip of paper with a 6-digit code. She looked up, her voice quieter than the snow falling outside. "Why me?" Albert folded his hands. "Lucille said you'd understand things others wouldn't. She knew Evan would never look deeper. But you," he paused. You once fixed my pocket watch when no one else would touch it. Charged me a cup of hot chocolate. That's the kind of mind she trusted. Claire managed a small laugh. I remember that. You said it hadn't ticked in 20 years. It's still ticking, he said, tapping his coat pocket. Just like your mother hoped you would. Albert leaned closer, his voice a whisper. This isn't just a keepsake. Your mother built it for something only you could finish. Claire wasn't sure what the key would open. But deep down, she already knew where it belonged. Snow clung to the lower panes of the greenhouse windows, a lacy crust that dulled the morning light. Claire stood at the edge of the overgrown path behind the Whitmore house, breathing in the crisp air and clutching the brass key tightly in her coat pocket. The frostbitten vines that once held sunflowers now tangled around the frame like the ghosts of summers past. She remembered being 6, hands buried in soil beside her mother, Lucille laughing as she called the greenhouse, a place that listens. Nancy shuffled behind her, arms full, a blanket, gloves, a thermos. It hasn't changed much, she said softly, surveying the warped glass and weather-worn beams. Still smells like basil and forgotten things. Claire didn't respond. Her eyes scanned the edges of the structure, searching for something that felt more remembered than seen. She found it in the southwest corner, a wooden panel that groaned as she knelt and pressed her fingers into a familiar knot in the grain. A soft click. She looked back at Nancy. You were always the quiet one, Nancy murmured, but you listened. Claire nodded and pulled out the note with the 6-digit code. There was a small square pad inset into the floor, a keypad nearly invisible beneath a dusted hatch plate. She entered the numbers with deliberate care. A low thud echoed beneath the wood, followed by a grinding hum. The floor split open in a triangular shape, revealing a narrow stairwell beneath. Nancy exhaled. Well, I'll be. Claire glanced up. Stay here. Nancy smiled. Not a chance. The stairs were cold metal, lined with condensation. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old circuits. As they descended, motion sensor lights flickered to life, casting soft golden halos across the walls. What opened below wasn't sterile or sharp. It was warm, worn, like walking into Lucille's private version of order. Shelves lined the walls, some cluttered with small machines, others with binders and folders marked by decades. There were handwritten labels: solar engine prototype, 1987, memory mechanism V.3, time mapping, incomplete. Claire touched a wooden stool and felt a wave of dizziness. The space hummed not with wires, but with intention. On the far wall was a coat rack. Lucille's old cardigan, faded blue, still hung there. Claire's knees gave slightly. She reached for the back of a chair to steady herself, breathing in the scent, lavender and lemon soap. Nancy stepped ahead quietly, kneeling at a metal filing cabinet with scuffed paint and a sticker that read, "Property of LW." Claire moved toward the monitor. Taped beside the screen was a Polaroid, her and her mother, muddy hands, wide grins, sunflower petals stuck in Claire's braid. The corners curled. A quiet sob escaped before she could stop it. She reached out, gently touching the photo with the tips of her fingers, her thumb brushing the edge like a prayer. Nancy said nothing, just poured warm tea into the lid of the thermos and left it on the desk. Claire wiped her cheek with the sleeve of her coat and sat. There was a journal resting beside the monitor, a simple cloth-bound book with her mother's handwriting across the cover, for Claire, when she's ready. Inside, the pages were filled with sketches, notes, crossed-out thoughts. Near the center, she read a single line written larger than the others. They took my name. They'll never take your light. Claire closed her eyes. On the desk sat a USB drive labeled Redemption Protocol. Its edges were smooth, untouched by time. Claire picked it up, heart thudding. She turned to Nancy, who was now browsing one of the open binders. She kept everything. She knew what she was doing, Nancy whispered. Even when others didn't. Claire inserted the drive into the terminal. The screen blinked, then a voice, Lucille's voice, began to play, low and clear, not a recording from a stage or meeting room, but intimate, as if meant only for her. Claire, if you're hearing this, they never found it. You did. And I knew you would. The sound filled the space like a melody only memory could carry. Claire sat still, the weight of the room settling into her ribs. The floor above creaked, once, then again. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed across the greenhouse ceiling. Claire froze, clutching the journal to her chest. Someone's in the greenhouse. Lucille's voice echoed through the lab like a lullaby lost in time. Claire stood frozen in the afterglow of her mother's message. The warmth of Lucille's voice still clung to the corners of the room like steam from tea just poured. Nancy, quiet but alert, moved to check the stairwell, her hand resting on the railing as if ready to shield Claire from whatever, or whoever, had stepped above them. The footsteps faded. Claire turned back to the terminal, her breath slowly returning. On the screen, a prompt flickered, "Continue?" She pressed a no. Not yet. Her eyes wandered to the shelves nearest the workbench, blueprints rolled into glass tubes, machine parts arranged with the care of someone who didn't build for profit, but for possibility. She traced her fingers along a label, Wind Engine 1987. The design was familiar, eerily so. Whitmore Industries had unveiled a nearly identical model 2 years ago. Another folder, Autothermic Insulation, bore striking resemblance to the Foundation's latest eco-building initiative. Claire pulled it open, her hands trembling. Each sheet was dated, annotated in Lucille's handwriting. And at the bottom of every form, a bold red stamp, "Patent rejected, applied under CEO Whitmore." Nancy crossed the room and placed a hand gently on Claire's shoulder. She wasn't just protecting ideas, she said. She was protecting proof. Claire nodded, teeth clenched. They buried her. Professionally. Publicly. Nancy reached into her coat pocket and held out a small sealed envelope. "Lucille gave me this 15 years ago. Said to wait until the right hands opened the right door." Claire peeled the wax seal open with care. Inside was another USB, labeled Redemption Protocol, Part 2, and a folded notarized affidavit. Her name was written at the top in flowing blue ink. The document detailed the origin of multiple patents, all initially filed under Lucille Whitmore, later reassigned without consent to Charles Whitmore, Claire's father. Claire skimmed the statements. It was all here: timeline, witness letters, Lucille's signed testimony. Her hand hovered over the signature line at the bottom, her own name already typed beneath it. She hadn't even been born when this was drafted. She whispered, "She planned this my whole life." Nancy's eyes shone. She knew what they were capable of. But she also knew you. Claire stepped to the central table, where several framed diagrams leaned against the wall. Among them, she noticed a packet with patent forms bearing her name in the corner, filed, Claire Elise Whitmore. Date of birth, November 28, 1989. She sank onto the stool, emotions surging. These weren't just files. This was a lifeline. Lucille had placed her trust not in courts or companies, but in her daughter. On a nearby shelf, an old tape recorder caught her attention. She pressed play. A familiar rhythm played softly, a bedtime story. Her mother's voice again, slower this time, telling a tale about a girl who lived inside a clock and could only speak when the truth was near. Claire let the words wash over her, each one drawing her deeper into memory. Scent clung to the air, lavender oil, lemon soap, and the sweet mustiness of old paper. She closed her eyes. "I miss you," she whispered. The lights flickered. Nancy looked up. Power surge. Claire's gaze darted to the stairwell. The metal door at the top was slightly ajar. A creak echoed. A shadow passed just beyond the frosted glass panel. Then came a voice. Soft. Coiled. "Claire." She stiffened, every muscle alert. Claire hears her name whispered, realizes Evan may have entered the greenhouse above. Truth ticked louder than any clock Claire had ever heard. Rain whipped against the Whitmore estate in uneven sheets, carried by a wind that rattled the shutters and pressed the dark sky low against the earth. Inside, the storm was rivaled only by the tension climbing through the wood-paneled walls. Claire stood in the front parlor, still in her coat, the original clock resting beside her on the credenza. Its wood was darker now under the lamp's glow, almost expectant. Thunder cracked overhead. The front door burst open. Evan entered like a question asked too late, wet shoes squeaking on the floor, tie loosened, face flushed. "Where is it?" he demanded, jaw tight. Claire didn't move. "Where's what?" He stepped forward, drenched and shaking with more than just cold. "Don't play dumb. The files. The lab. Whatever our mother was hiding down there, whatever fairy tale she convinced you to believe." Claire stayed composed, voice steady. "Not fairy tales. Documents. Prototypes. Patents with her name stripped and yours stamped over them." His eyes narrowed. "She didn't understand the business. She built toys. She built the foundation of everything you claim to run." Claire opened the leather folder she'd carried in from the greenhouse. She handed him the affidavit, Lucille's sworn testimony, dates, designs, original filings. He read the first page before slamming it shut. "This doesn't change anything." "No." Claire pulled her phone from her pocket. "Because it's already been sent. To the OIR, to investigative journalists, to the Federal Patent Board. And to Ms. Allen, from the Office of Invention Rights, who should be arriving right about now." As if summoned, the front door opened again. Nancy stepped inside, umbrella in hand. Behind her stood a woman in a slate gray coat, badge clipped at her hip, rainwater beading on her glasses. "Ms. Claire Whitmore?" the agent asked. "We've received your whistleblower files and preliminary documentation. This estate, along with all holdings of Whitmore Industries, is now under injunction pending federal investigation." Evan's mouth opened, then closed. "You can't do that." Ms. Allen raised a brow. "We already did." Claire glanced at the clock. Her mother's clock. She lifted it carefully, turned it to reveal the hidden panel now retrofitted with a second USB port. Redemption Protocol, Part 2. With deliberate fingers, she pressed the carved wooden lever beneath the base. The hands of the clock shifted, 12, 3, 6, 9. A chime sequence played, low and resonant. From across the room, a small projector, concealed behind a cabinet, lit up and cast a beam across the mantel. Lucille's face appeared, slightly faded, but unmistakable. "To Charles Whitmore," she began, "and to my son Evan, I built the things you claimed as your own. I signed forms I never read because I loved you. I watched my ideas win awards with someone else's name engraved. But I didn't stop working. And I didn't stop documenting." Evan stumbled back, the color draining from his face. "To my daughter," Lucille continued, "I never gave you praise loud enough. But I gave you everything I could. I gave you this clock, because it doesn't measure hours, it measures truth." Nancy's hands were clasped tightly together, tears glinting in her eyes. Ms. Allen said nothing, only watched, arms folded. Claire took the photo of Lucille she'd carried in her bag and placed it on the mantel beneath the projection. The old frame clicked into place against the stone. The image on screen faded to black. The room fell silent, except for the ticking. Evan slumped into the armchair behind him, as if the storm outside had finally entered through the cracks in his world. Ms. Allen turned to Claire. "Claire Whitmore, by legal right and confirmed ownership, you now control the legacy they tried to erase. Sometimes, the things we think are broken are the ones holding everything together." The air in Ashford was different now. Autumn had returned, but this time without the weight it had carried the year before. The leaves still blazed in orange and gold, but the wind felt warmer, friendlier, as if the town had exhaled after a long-held breath. Along the western edge of Main Street, the greenhouse stood tall and bright, its once cracked panes replaced, its frame reinforced and painted a cheerful forest green. Above the arched entrance, a new sign read, "Lucille Whitmore Innovation Center." Claire stood just beyond the front doors, watching as families filtered in from the gravel path, children tugging at sleeves, older couples arm in arm. The scent of baked cranberries and spiced cider floated from the folding tables lining the greenhouse walls. The brunch was casual, no speeches yet, just laughter, music from an old portable radio, and the clink of forks against ceramic plates. She moved among them, dressed in a dark burgundy sweater, a clipboard forgotten under her arm. Nancy appeared beside her, holding a paper plate stacked with turkey sliders. No one's used paper plates this nice since the bicentennial, she teased. Claire smiled. Albert insisted. Said it felt more official. As if on cue, Albert Greeley appeared near the display of student prototypes. He looked sharp in his brown cardigan and bow tie, cane resting against the table. Around him, 4 teenagers clustered, pointing at a small wind-powered water purifier one had built. Claire watched him with quiet admiration. A year ago, he'd helped her find a part of Lucille's story no one else even knew existed. Today, he was helping others write their own. She stepped up to the front of the room and gently tapped her glass with a spoon. The crowd quieted. I never imagined I'd be standing here a year ago, Claire began. But I think my mother always did. She glanced toward the center's back wall, where Lucille's photograph now hung above a row of framed patent certificates, each one bearing her name. This place exists because she believed in building things, not just for applause, but because they mattered. Because the right idea, in the right hands, could change everything. She paused. Today, I'm proud to announce the Lucille Fund, a grant that will support women over 50 who want to invent, tinker, experiment, and maybe be heard for the first time. Applause filled the space. Claire caught Nancy wiping at her eyes with a napkin. Afterward, Albert approached with something small in his palm. I've been saving this, he said. It was the pocket watch Claire had repaired long ago at the diner, when she was barely old enough to reach the counter. The brass casing had been polished, but its familiar scratches remained. She opened it. The second hand ticked perfectly. You gave me time when I needed it, he said. I'm giving it back. Claire closed the watch gently and nodded. Thank you. Later, she slipped away for a moment, stepping out toward the small grove just beyond the Innovation Center. Beneath the old oak tree rested a simple stone with Lucille's name. Claire knelt beside it, her hands wrapped around the clock she'd once found so hollow. It now ticked steadily, restored, with a new chime installed by one of the students. She placed it gently beside the headstone. You didn't just leave me something to fix, she whispered. You left me something to build. As she rose, a young voice called from behind her. Miss Whitmore. I made something from your mom's blueprints. Can I show you? Claire turned, smiling as the girl held up a small motor-powered gadget. Only if you teach me how it works. Together they walked back toward the center, the glass walls aglow with light and movement. Just as the large clock above the entrance struck noon, its new chime echoed through the room, clear, confident, and warm. Claire looked up, eyes shining. Right on time, Mom. Even in a room filled with invention and celebration, it was the quiet chime of an old clock that seemed to hold everyone still, reminding them of a woman who changed the world not by shouting, but by trusting someone would one day hear her. Sometimes, the greatest legacies aren't left in gold or titles, but in the courage to plant something no one else sees yet, and the kindness to pass it on. When we stop judging by what's on the surface, we make room for the quiet brilliance that's been waiting to be seen all along. If this story stirred something familiar in you, maybe it's time to dust off that old memory, that unopened letter, that act of kindness you've been meaning to give. Because like a clock that finally chimes again, goodness has a way of finding its moment,